So we are delighted that you're here, and we're looking forward to hearing what John has to say after 22 years at HSU. Before we do, let me just say a little bit about John. His BA is in Biology and Environmental Studies from UC Santa Cruz, and his MA and PhD in Biology from Harvard. But before I go and hit any of the other bullets on the list, let me say that, I forgot to say, I'm Dale Oliver, the Dean of the College of Natural Resources and Sciences. The provost intended to be here but could not be here, so you get me. One of the College of Natural Resources and Sciences activities from last year was to finish up a strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, one of our values was the teacher-scholar model for faculty. And when I thought about introducing John, I thought, that's John. He is a teacher-scholar in the best sense of the word, and I hope you get a sense for that tonight, for what he has accomplished in terms of being an outstanding classroom teacher, an educator, and mentor, and also that he continues to be very active in his field and continues to evolve his interests in that. I want to read a couple of quotes. One from a student in a comparative anatomy class. Student says, honestly, how approachable and helpful the professor was made the class wonderful. He absolutely challenged us while giving us all of the tools we needed to succeed and would spend extra time out of his life, such as weekend lab time and review sessions, just to assist his students and ensure our success. Furthermore, his excitement about the material and fairness of his exams were extraordinary. It made for an amazing learning environment, an incentive to further our education. So that's the teacher part. Let me read a couple of colleague quotes about, they're kind of teacher and scholar. So as a colleague, John has worked as a mentor as well. In fact, one of his former students is now his colleague, Allison Bronson, Dr. Allison Bronson, and she said, I think what's most unique about John's mentorship is that he truly believes all of his students are capable of achieving excellence. John Steele wrote, he works hard inside the classroom and through multiple committees to support student success and close opportunity gaps and to cultivate passions for scientific inquiry throughout our program. He is an excellent educator who models enthusiasm, compassion, scientific inquiry, and lifelong learning. His accomplishments are many, and we're going to hear a little bit about them, or at least, I think, if we can get him to share a little bit of those today in the presentation. So please join me in welcoming the Humboldt State University Professor of the Year, John Reiss.
Well, thank you, Dale, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And I have to say, it's really quite an honor to be standing before you here as the outstanding professor of last year, because I'm more than aware of the folks who have preceded me in this role. Looking back over the list of the 50 outstanding professors who have previously been recognized, 9 of them have been from the biological sciences, and of those 9, I personally know 7 of those folks, and it's hard to believe that I actually belong on this list, but since my colleagues nominated me, thank you, and it is just an amazing honor. It's also been just a neat experience for me going through what I had to do to prepare this presentation, because one of the things I had to do was to go back and look through all of my photos to find photos of folks that I wanted to include. And the first and really most challenging part of that was finding a picture of myself for the poster, because I looked through my photos and I guess I just don't do selfies. this is what all the pictures of me in my photos look like. So then I checked with my wife, Karen, and looked through her photos, and this is what I mostly found. But we did manage to find that one picture of me with a nice gumboot chitin on in a Zoology 110 field trip that did make it onto the poster. What I also, though, was reminded about is just how incredibly fortunate I've been to be here at Humboldt State and Humboldt County for these last 22 years. I mean, you all know this is a beautiful place that we live with incredible opportunities for our own recreation and for taking students out into the world. And I've had a family here that has really been a great place to raise a family. My wife Karen, my daughter Zoe, my son Owen, and my dog Max. And I've had wonderful, wonderful colleagues that I've just really enjoyed working with all these years, and wonderful staff supporting us. So it's just been a great experience, and I'm not retiring quite yet, but I feel like I just wanted to recognize that. So I'm nominated as the Outstanding Professor. Recognize, what do professors do? Well, we've got really 3 areas of our work. We teach, we do research and scholarly activity, and we do service. And so I want to talk about each of those in turn. And start with teaching. That's me, with Halen from Companat. And lately I've been teaching 3 classes, mainly introductory zoology, and there's a picture of me with actually my daughter on a field trip for Zoology 110, and it's great for that class so we can get to go out into the intertidal and see the organisms in the wild. Oops, let's see if I can do that. Comparative anatomy, which is my specialty, my first love, and just a great time always. Students love getting in there and cutting things up. What could be better? And most recently, I've taken over the electron microscopy class, and this is really a new kind of a class for me because it's really technique-based. We're learning how to use these fancy instruments that we've got, and students can do any kind of project they want, and I just really enjoy learning from the students about all these areas of biology like bacteria, algae, things I know nothing about, so that's been really a lot of fun. Oops, there we go. I've also had wonderful grad students through the years that I've been here, and it's really neat to work with them and see them explore new areas and learn about things that I, again, know very little about, but maybe just enough to advise them. And I've also had a wonderful undergraduate research students, a whole long list of them, 2 of them here, one of them, Dale mentioned, Allison Bronson, who's now returned to HSU after getting her PhD and is lecturing in the department, and Amber Van Hecke, who's working with me and Allison on a Newton nose project that Allison started here when she was an undergrad. And yes, Allison, we will get that done. It's kind of a long-term project. So this has all been great, and I just have to say that the students we have here at Humboldt State are not necessarily the most academically high-achieving students that you will see at any university, but they've got to be just the nicest students that you'll find anywhere, and they can do top quality work just given the opportunity. So that's been great. And then I want to say just a little bit about research and my research focus. And this is Something Smells Fishy, Part 1. So the basic context for everything I do has to do with amphibians and the water-to-land transition. And that water-to-land transition occurs both in phylogeny or evolution, going from water to land, as Tiktaalik, this fish, once did, and in ontogeny, or the life cycle of every individual amphibian that lays its eggs in the water, goes through a larval stage, and then metamorphoses, comes out onto land, and has to do that all in its own life cycle. So what I've been looking at mainly is the amphibian olfactory system. And the question I really started with when I started looking at this is, well, how does the morphology of the olfactory system adapt to this change from water to land? And the real simple scenario you start with is you go from being a larva to an adult, you're smelling in water, you come out, you're smelling on land. But when you look at amphibians, it's really a little more complicated than that. because some amphibian adults are not always in the air. Amphibians return to water to breed, most species. There are animals like this axolotl here that are neotenic and become sexually mature in the water and stay in the water their whole life. And there are secondarily aquatic adults like this xenopus here who go through a morphological metamorphosis but also stay in the water. So there's these aquatic adults. And what I want to do is look at 3 examples of amphibians and how their noses really have adapted to these changes. The Pacific giant salamander, tailed frogs, and Budgett's frogs. So if we look at salamander noses, which of course I like to do, we look at salamander noses, and what you see is that in the larvae, I've got just 2 nasal chambers, one we call the principal cavity and one the vomeronasal organ. The same thing's true in the adult, but where we see some differences just at the gross morphology level is the olfactory epithelium in the larvae has ridges or folds running down the length of the nose. And then in the adult, there's this new duct that develops called the nasolacrimal duct or tear duct that carries tears from the eye to the nasal cavity. But if we look, oops, there we go, more detail at the coastal giant salamander that my former student Jeremy Schulpnagel studied. These guys have a really interesting life cycle because they have the ability to be either metamorphosed terrestrial adults or they can be neotenic and become sexually mature in the water. And it's facultative for individual animals whether they do one or the other. But once they've made that choice, they're going that way. And these are cool critters. We look at the nose, and what we need to do is go and use electron microscopy to study the cell types of the nose. And there are 4 basic cell types, 2 types of receptor cells, ciliated and microvillar, and these are the actual sensory cells that detect smell. And then there are supporting cells, also ciliated and microvillar or secretory. And this cell type composition distinguishes a water-smelling from an air-smelling epithelium. What we see is that air-adapted epithelium typically has just 2 types or 1 type even of receptor cell and just the microvillar or secretory supporting cells, whereas the water-smelling epithelium, what we might call a fishy epithelium, has all 4 types present. And the other thing we see is that there are glands called Bowman's glands that are present in an air-adapted epithelium, not in the water-adapted epithelium. So when Jeremy looked at these, what he found is that in the larvae and the neotines, always in the water, they had all 4 cell types present and just rudimentary Bowman's glands. In the adults, in the middle part of the nose, the medial part of the principal cavity, you found just 3 cell types present and well-developed Bowman's glands. But over on the side of the main nasal cavity, all 4 cell types are present and there are no Bowman's glands. So there is, in the adult, this fishy type epithelium, this larval type epithelium in the lateral side of the nose. And it suggests that they're smelling water in these metamorphosed adults. Second example, Scaphus truei, tailed frog. These are really cool animals. They're most primitive living frogs. Adrian, are you out there? He's Adrian working on these guys there. They live in fast-flowing streams by day. They come out on banks at night and feed. And I had a former graduate student, Noel, who looked at these guys and looked at their noses. And they actually are doing something fairly similar to Dicamptodon. So if we look in the larvae, there's, again, a main nasal cavity and vomeronasal organ in the larvae. Adults, principal cavity, vomeronasal organ. And then this third cavity, the middle cavity, it's non-sensory that develops. And the nasolacrimal duct, again, develops in the adults. At the level of electron microscopy, what we see is that the nose is divided into an anterior part and a posterior part, and the cell type composition is completely different. And in the anterior part, we see all 4 cell types present, posterior part, just 2. So if we look at an overview again, larvae have all 4, the front part of the nose in the adult has all 4, but the back part just has these 2 cell types present, the ciliated receptors and microvillar supporting cells. And the Bowman glands, likewise, are present in the back and not in the front of the nose. So again, we see these two different types of epithelium in the same nasal cavity, suggesting that the adults are smelling water. Well, cool. But you might want to wonder, like, is it really working this way? This is just based on the morphology. So I wanted to do an experiment. And what we did is we took some frogs and put them in a colored dye solution, let them swim around for a day, and then euthanized them very humanely with IACUC approval, and froze their heads and sliced them up. And this is what you see. So you look at the nose, this is anterior, posterior, and the whole front half of the nose soaked up the dye, and you can see it got deeply stained. The back half of the nose completely unstained. And so they are somehow able to get water into the front half of the nose through this water-smelling epithelium and keep it out of the back half of the nose where the air-smelling epithelium is present. Cool. Last example I want to give is from my sabbatical work. And there's these really cool frogs that live down in South America, the family Ceratophryidae, and they include these guys. These are the Pac-Man frogs, many of you may know from the pet trade. And this is the Budget's frog, which is a neat animal. It's a secondarily aquatic adult. They have some features that are not normally found in adult frogs, like a lateral line system, which senses movement in the water. They have a really well-developed hyobranchial apparatus that's used for suction feeding underwater. So these are really crazy, weird frogs, and I wanted to see like what's going on with their nose. And so I was fortunate enough to take a sabbatical in Argentina, went down there and worked with some wonderful colleagues, Silvia Quincio, Marissa Fabrici, and Javier Goldberg, and looked at these frogs. And what we found with these 4 species, we looked at, is that in the front of the nose, there's this area called the olfactory recess. And this in other frogs has been correlated with smelling things in water. It's an area of water-smelling epithelium with no Bowman's glands present. Okay. There's also a structure called the olfactory eminence, this raised area of the floor of the nose. That's been correlated with terrestriality in other species. And when we looked at these frogs, what we saw is that in the Budget's frog, the most aquatic one, this olfactory eminence is basically non-existent, whereas in terrestrial Pac-Man frogs, you've got this giant olfactory eminence. Likewise, if we look at the olfactory recess, this area that's correlated with water smelling, in the juveniles, it's not particularly well developed, but when we get into the adults, you see a highly developed olfactory recess. So these frogs have adapted to this secondarily aquatic life cycle. So 3 examples, 3 different situations that we see, but in all of them, we see that the adults seem to be having this water-smelling, fishy type epithelium present in their noses. Aha. So if we go back to this question, how does the morphology change? This simple scenario I started with, where you go from a larva to adult smelling in water to smelling in air, doesn't really apply. Instead, what's going on is you're going from smelling in water to smelling in both water and air in all these species we've looked at. And this fishy epithelium, as we might call it, is present in adults alongside of the more typical terrestrial air-smelling epithelium. Okay, maybe not that surprising, but this really hadn't been described before, and it's been a neat finding. And you might wonder, where do we go next? Well, this is very interesting. Aha, into the future, the caecilians. So caecilians are a third group of living amphibians. Most people don't know them because they live in the tropics. They're burrowing animals. They eat earthworms. They kind of look like giant earthworms. But these guys, nobody has looked at their noses before. And my current grad student, Jackie Patmore, who didn't know I was taking a picture of her, sorry, Jackie, is going to be looking at caecilians and trying to figure out what is going on with their noses. So I'm excited to see. We have no idea. All right. The third area for us to work in as faculty, as professors, is service. And I ended up, through no choice of my own, really, as department chair. And this is me. And as department chair, I guess I viewed my role as twofold. One is to protect my faculty from everything coming down from above as best I could, at the same time to try to move the department forward in ways that I thought I could. That was cool, and it was neat to be able to do that. It's not really as much fun as teaching, but what I wanted to do in this venue is maybe fulfill my service obligations in another way and bring up some topics that I feel like we need to be talking about that just have not been talked about much on campus in public fora recently. So this is what I call Something Smells Fishy, Part 2. And I want to talk about morale on campus right now, which to me is kind of the big elephant in the room that we're not talking about publicly, and we really need to be. And I want to take a historical perspective, because I love history. I always kind of look at things from a historical perspective. How did we get to where we are today? And so I got here 22 years ago, and what I found was this really vital department with a really rich curriculum, particularly in organismal biology, and wonderful, wonderful faculty who were experts in their field, offering a really high quality education to their students. And I included Jim Waters, which I love this picture of him both in Oric with a bear, Gary Bruska, wonderful invertebrate zoologist, John Sawyer, the expert on everything about California vegetation, Dennis Walker, Dr. Death as he was known, excellent plant morphologist, Tim Lawler, a mammologist, and Bill Brusky, who apparently has no pictures extant of him, so I put a microscope in, but all of these folks were really inspiring to me when I came into the department as examples of people who just put so much into their teaching and their so much caring for their students. And like I said, they were experts, and there are many books that came out of HSU faculty in biology that are still in print today, still used. Okay, this is not just a bunch of folks who are teaching, but they are producing scholarly works. And there were a couple new guys in the department too when I got here. This is Jacob Varkey and Michael Messler. Both of them are still teaching right now. Both are in the FERP program, and Michael is in his last semester of his FERP. And both of them are also previous recipients of the Outstanding Professor Award. Wonderful folks. And I had the opportunity last fall to sit in on, this answer is not wanting to work, to sit on Michael's plant taxonomy course. And this is a famous course, HSU. This is the reason you see all these students lugging large books around with them everywhere. That's the Jepson Manual. And what I think a lot of these students in the class do not know is how much time Michael puts in outside of the class, driving all over Humboldt and Trinity counties and beyond to get plant material to bring in so those students in the class will have something to look at and identify and work with and really learn how to be plant taxonomists. And I was thinking about this talk, I was just reminded of some boilerplate language that we have in our job announcements whenever we try to hire new faculty. Dedication to superior instruction of undergraduates is a long-standing tradition at Humboldt, and it is, and that we take that really seriously. And nevertheless, in the 22 years I've been here, it's been hard to maintain the quality and strength of our program. We've seen a lot of administrative turnover and a lot of budget and enrollment crises. We've got 4 presidents who have come through, our 4th one here now, since I've been here, and a number of crises. Most of you who've been around as long as I have will remember these. Back in 2004, 2005, we had a low enrollment situation, as we may be experiencing now, and we had a consultant hired to address that, Noel Levitt, so we had the Noel Levitt's report. Then the big budget crisis of 2008, 2009, which was a national budget crisis that hit California's state budget pretty hard. And we had furloughs on campus. We also had the program prioritization process that was going on then, which many of us have tried to put out of our minds, but it was actually going on right more or less simultaneous with that budget crisis, and then our current budget crisis that's going on. And it was interesting because I wanted to go back and look at some of these things and see what the language that came out of them was. Noel Levitz in 2005 was making some recommendations for improving our enrollment, and there were two that really stood out to me. One of them was this: we should meld the marketing of HSU's natural beauty with the marketing of its academic strengths, not to emphasize the geographical and recreational advantages in their own right. Academic excellence and program availability are more important than location. And then this one, just as a zoologist, biologist, I really appreciated for programs to promote because they enjoy high demand and high market share are zoology, biodiversity, biology, general biology, and cellular molecular biology. Well, I'm not sure to what degree these recommendations were acted on, but I do know there was one recommendation that was acted on, and we got some new gates out of the process, and that was pretty cool. Fast forward a few years to the real budget crisis, 2008, 2009, and this is an article I pulled up from an old North Coast journal, Campus in Crisis, Dysfunction and Budget Cuts Bring HSU to the Brink of Disaster. And it was a really rough time here on campus, as all of you who were here then remember, dealing with these budget cuts, and we had faculty meetings where we were discussing which staff should be let go, and very unpleasant all around. At the same time, we had a program prioritization process that had been initiated really prior to the budget crisis, but kind of played out along with it. And this was really a good exercise to look across HSU at all of our programs, what's important, what's not important, what programs really should be getting more support and be strengthened, which ones were having issues that we might want to look at and either rescue or decide that they weren't really doing what they needed to be doing and we needed to get rid of them. And of course, this is a scary time for everyone because you feel like you're under the gun and how are you going to come through this? So we were very happy when we came out. It was ranked number 3 across all programs in the university in biology. But the other thing that came out of this, of course, was the elimination of nursing and industrial technology. And I know for the community at large, loss of nursing was a big deal, and we still hear about it today. It's not really looked at too favorably. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There were some really great things that have happened since I've been here. And one thing that's been really neat is just the increase in the diversity of our students, which is something that has been made a priority of the administration. And when I came in fall '97, we had only 13% underrepresented minority students. Last fall, it was 44%. And this means we're really doing a much better job serving the diversity of folks in California, which is our job. And I think it provides a richer campus environment. The other good thing I want to point to is MSF fees, because I feel like people don't really remember how important those have been to us. But MSF fees, which students are paying, are huge because they've saved a lot of aspects of our programs that otherwise we wouldn't have had money for. And I always am telling students in my class, you've got a scalpel because you were paying that MSF fee. You've got gloves because you were paying that MSF fee. And these other facilities we're supporting with these MSF fees. So thank you, students, for that. But here we are in 2017 and onward in our next current budget crisis situation. And I'm really worried about where we are and where we're going at this point. The integrity of the institution, to me, seems like it's in jeopardy. And you wonder, why the heck is this happening to us? Why are we in this budget crisis now? Because CSU funding is good. You read in the newspaper, it's like, whoa, look, great work. We got extra money for the CSU. California is running this huge budget surplus. So this is not a general problem. This is not 2008 when the entire national economy crashed. And part of the history of all this really goes back to a previous budget crisis before I even got here in 1990-91. And CSU system used to use this thing called the Orange Book. How many of you have heard of the Orange Book? A couple of people, old folks. The Orange Book was a set of formulae to allot money based on programs that you had. And so some programs were considered to be high expense programs. You would get more money for them than if you had low expense programs. And this would distribute money across the CSU. Well, when they threw this out, we went to kind of a one-size-fits-all model. And that's not a great thing for HSU, because HSU has a huge number of science, technology, and math students. If you look just at those three categories, we are number one in the CSU by a long shot in science, technology, and math. That's kind of cool. If you look at engineering thrown in, or all the STEM fields, we're number two in the CSU, and we're up there with SLO, Cal Poly SLO, and Cal Poly Pomona as having a huge concentration of science, technology, engineering, and math, which is great. But this, together with a bunch of other programs, means we've got a pretty expensive mix of programs, and that makes a problem for us, gradually being squeezed by the state. At the same time, though, get this to go, there we go. From my perspective, I think we're spending too much on non-academic stuff. And I wanted to go back and take a look at our budget when I came in and compare it to where we are now. And it was a little hard to get these data. I actually had to get in contact with the Chancellor's office because we had no local record of what our budget was in 1997-98. But I did that, and Amber Blakesley in the budget office was really helpful to me in making sure I was comparing apples to apples as best I could. And what you see is that if we look at the category of instruction, we've decreased the amount of our budget we're spending on instruction. We've slightly decreased what we're spending on academic support. We've increased slightly student services. Institutional support, which is administration, has gone up significantly, as has operation and maintenance of plant, which surprised me a bit. There is, just as a caveat, this reimbursed activities column, which is a category that no longer exists, and so these funds should be distributed somewhat among institutional support and operation and maintenance of plant, but the overall picture doesn't change. We're spending less on academics. And if we look at the actual numbers, you can see that we're down 7.2% with respect to what we were spending 22 years ago. Okay, that's $4.4 million that would be coming to instruction right now that is not coming to instruction, that's going to other areas of the university. And that's a minimum estimate. It could be greater than that. If we look at student tuition and fees, they've gone up 310%. It was about $2,000 a year, and now almost $8,000 a year. Students are paying more, and they're getting less because there's less money being devoted to instruction. And if you look at our faculty numbers, we've gone down from 304 tenure track faculty to 253, or 17% decrease, which is pretty significant. Okay, we've lost almost a fifth of our tenure track faculty. So, this is a problem, and it's not all just being driven by these larger patterns. There are decisions being made on campus that are driving this. Okay, there we go. So I have the benefit of having a wife, Karen, who's wonderful, but that's not what I wanted to say. She also happens to be at another institution locally, College of the Redwoods, and they've had their own issues through the years. They've been through way more presidents than we have, and you may remember they had a huge crisis a few years ago. Budget woes, they were under the gun on their accreditation, there was threat they were going to lose their accreditation entirely. And in 2012, they had a new president come in, Kathy Smith, who came from Mendocino College. And she told them, and I remember this very vividly because it was like, really? The president said, what? She told them, you guys are over-administered. And she restructured the administration and cut the administration budget by 50% or so. I don't know the exact details. But that, together with a lot of hard work by administrators and faculty on the campus, turned them around. And they're in pretty good shape these days. So maybe that's a lesson for us. If I look at what's been going on here, I feel like our administration is not investing in the institution and the people in the institution. Instead, they've been trying to do everything by cutting, without realizing that there's an income side of things, and you can actually improve things by bringing more in, by hiring faculty who gets grants with overhead, for example, this sort of thing, by fundraising, et cetera. And we just are cutting ourselves and cutting ourselves. We cut almost 10 million out in the last 2 years, and now we're told we need to cut over 5 million more because we've got an enrollment crisis. And this is a very timely article that just came out yesterday in the Lost Coast Outpost. HSU enrollment is down by over 1,000 students and expected to keep falling for years. And they were saying, based on interviews with folks on campus, that the administration is now predicting that we're going to get down to something like 5,500 students or something on campus. And what's going on with that? That's just weird. This is being driven partly by our success at graduating students. We are graduating more students than ever before, but mostly it's being driven by a decrease in our admissions, where our number of applications are down, but even more significantly, our yield is down from about 20% of students who were accepted to HSU actually coming back in 2012 to 13% for this current year. So something is not happening right over in admissions and enrollment management if they can't get students who are admitted to HSU to actually show up on campus. Okay, that's my personal perspective. If you look at our enrollment overall, we've been hanging out right around here, about 7,000 students for a long time, since the 70s, huge growth up till then. But if over the last 5 years, our enrollment has just tanked, and this is not a general CSU phenomenon. CSU enrollment has held pretty steady. Okay, so on campus, somebody's not running things right, is my perspective. So, things do feel a bit like they're falling apart here. And we felt, a lot of folks that I talked to, that there's not a lot of respect we're feeling from the higher administration for the faculty and staff and what we do, for what the institution is and has been, and for the most fundamental thing that we're all here for, offering a quality education to our students. And we're losing good people. This is one example I really felt like I had to bring up. Courtney Otto, wonderful lecturer in our department. She got the Excellence in Teaching Award for lecturer the year before last. Same set of faculty awards. She's not with us anymore. She left because her workload was redefined in such a way that she lost 30% of her income, and she just couldn't really see doing it anymore. That's a real shame. We're losing good people who are really vital for our students and their education. And our students are aware of this. This is a poster that was up on the walls some years ago, maybe 2 years ago now, and I had to take a picture of it because I was kind of amused. But students feel this lack of respect for the education they're being offered. And I think they're a little over the top, but nonetheless, that's not good, and it can't really be helping our enrollment situation. So, things feel like they're falling apart a bit right now, and it seems like there's a lot of doubt on campus that our higher administration really knows what the heck they're doing in running this institution. If they're saying we're going to be down to 5,500 students in a couple of years, like, what? What's going on there? We've got more students than ever in the CSU, and we can't get them to HSU. Why not? I feel like I've had to, and my colleagues have had to devote an awful lot of time since I've been here to just trying to protect our programs rather than trying to develop things and do positive things for the future. And you may remember last year we had a survey that went out to all the faculty and staff called Great Colleges to Work For. This was instituted by Lisa Castellino in OIE. And the results have come back, and Lisa shared some preliminary analysis of them with me, and as you might suspect, we had really low scores for faculty, administrative, and staff relations, and senior leadership. This is a common problem recognized across campus, which was reassuring to me. It's not just me. Okay. So I want to kind of look more positively towards the future, and There was a quote that I read in one of these old North Coast Journal articles. The administration's focus is not on nurturing and developing high-quality academic programs here at HSU, which is in the common interest of both students and faculty. You know, what we need to do is focus on our high-quality programs and develop them. You know, this is what faculty need to feel like they're doing the work that they want to be doing. This is what students want, to have good quality programs. And this is what's going to bring students to HSU. You know, they'll come for the Redwoods if we've got great programs, but not if we don't. Oops. So I wanted to make some positive suggestions, things that I think would really help going forward. First of all, promote our strengths. You know, if we're a science-based institution, we've got more science, technology, math majors here than any other CSU, and yet we're not selling that because we're afraid it's too expensive, and so we don't want to promote that. We want students to come for cheaper things. But if they come here for science, technology, math, they will, many of them end up in other programs. We need the students to come here first. And there's actually a lot of data that we looked at some years ago that showed how many students come here for biology, let's say, and end up as a religious studies major. We need to retain and fill faculty lines. This has been the most damaging change, I think, since I've been here. That came out of the 2008 budget crisis. We used to, when a faculty member retired, if the classes were still there and needed to be taught, hire another faculty to teach those classes. Instead, all the faculty positions get vacuumed up into the central administration, and we have to beg for more faculty. And this puts us in a situation where we're just always afraid when people decide to retire or leave to go to another institution because our programs are under a threat. And in biology, we have 2 faculty who are leaving this year. Michael Messler, as I mentioned, is finishing his FERP and retiring. We've been really worried because he teaches plant taxonomy with 300 students a year, runs the herbarium. We need that faculty expertise, and fortunately we were just granted last week permission to do a faculty search to replace Michael, and I'm really happy about that. At the same time, we shouldn't have had to be sitting here on pins and needles waiting well into fall semester wondering if we were going to get to do that search. And Missy Hawkins, who's our mammologist, who we hired 2 years ago, after 8 years of not having a mammologist because Brian Arbogast left and we weren't able to replace that, and every year for 8 years we put in a request for that position. Finally we got it, we hired Missy. She's got another position that she's been offered, a wonderful position as curator of mammals at the Smithsonian Institution. Can't blame her for going there, but I'm wondering, you know, is it going to be another 8 years before we get a mammologist here again? You know, this is not a way to run an institution that is going to develop high quality programs. And these faculty that we can bring in are like wonderful. I'm so excited about all of the new generation of faculty in biology. They're just all great folks doing cool things with their students, and we should be able to keep bringing folks in to maintain our programs. Same thing's true for staff. We're now in a situation where no new permanent positions of staff are being hired on campus. And we lose staff, those people are not replaced, people get shifted around. It's, again, a really scary kind of situation where you just hope that nobody leaves because then you've lost that position. And in biology, we lost our microbiology prep person. And we were unable to get anybody else to come in because we didn't offer an attractive position. And we're kind of cobbling together something now that's kind of working, but it's just not a way to run a healthy institution. This is a little bit of a lark, but I just wanted to put this out there. It would be great if administrators would have office hours. You know, we faculty have office hours. It's been really hard for us in the department to just even get any feedback from some of the higher administration. We sent a letter to President Rossbacher, never heard anything back. You know, that's not cool. And I know people are busy and there's lots of important things to be done, but an hour or 2 a week probably would be workable, and you could actually go in and maybe have a conversation with hire an administrator, and maybe establish some kind of understanding. That would be helpful. And then, this is even more of a lark, but not really. I think this would be a wonderful thing. We need a faculty club. We need a venue to come together as faculty across the university and talk to folks in other departments. I hardly know what people in other parts of CNRS are doing. People on my hall I maybe run into, but other than that, forget it. And if there were a place where we could come together, maybe have a beer, and chat a bit, that would be pretty cool. And this is a quote that I got out of an old report from the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that I liked. So I guess I want to end here with this image. Many of you were at the convocation the president had at the beginning of the semester, and he showed a little clip from Apollo 13. And basically Apollo 13, as most of you know, got stranded up in space. They had some issues, and they needed to pull power out of the lunar landing module to get the spaceship back to Earth, or back to safety. And I puzzled for quite a while over, what this metaphor was supposed to be telling us. What is that lunar landing module that we're supposed to suck all the electricity out of to get our spaceship safely back to Earth? And I had various ideas, which I won't share with you, but then it occurred to me, I'm really not looking at this sort of big picture enough. The big picture is that, this lunar expedition, Apollo 13, all they had to do was get back to Earth. When they get back to Earth, there's plenty of water, there's plenty of electricity, everything's golden, okay? But, this is us. We got no Earth to go back to. We're just here, and we got to make it on our own. And we can't just keep operating as if we're in crisis mode all the time, everything temporary and just a kind of makeshift thing. We've been holding it all together with baling wire and Band-Aids for a long time, and we need to just have a model that actually gives people some stability and some sense of where things are going to go next year. And I think we can do it. I think there's some things we can actually do to turn things around, but it's going to take some doing. So hopefully that's a positive note, and I want to end by just saying, if I can, let's go, thank you. This was really what I was looking forward to from this whole process, is getting the opportunity to get up and spout off for a while. And I had hoped that the president and the provost would both be able to make it. Unfortunately, neither of them could, but I feel better. So thank you all.